Malcolm Training Tutorials. Configuration. Configuring Malcolm. In the last video you installed Malcolm. Now you will configure Malcolm and set up authentication. In this video you will cover an overview of the configuration questions and how to answer them. This is a simple setup of a Malcolm installation using the default suggested settings. If you need to change anything, you can rerun this configuration at any point.
Whether you installed Malcolm via the ISO or using Docker, this will be your first screen for configuration. As we go through these questions, you will accept the default for most. However, we will give a brief overview of each just in case you want to change from the default. You can find a more in-depth treatment of the configuration question in the Malcolm documentation at sysagov.github.io/Malcolm.
First, you are prompted to provide the name of the machine to associate with network traffic captured by or uploaded to this Malcolm instance. This will default to the system's hostname, which you provided previously during installation. Examples could include Malcolm VM, Malcolm Server, Malcolm Desktop, or another name you choose. Select OK.
Which Malcolm run profile should this instance run? A full Malcolm deployment or a capture-only configuration that will forward its data to another Malcolm instance. In this example, we're configuring a full Malcolm installation, which includes all of Malcolm's dashboards and other components. Select Malcolm.
Where should Malcolm store its data? Malcolm can manage its own OpenSearch data store for indexing and querying network traffic, or it can use a remote data store you manage externally to Malcolm. As we are configuring a standalone all-in-one Malcolm instance, we will select the default here. Select Yes.
If you will be configuring OpenSearch index snapshots, you could choose Yes here if you wish to reduce the size of those backups at the cost of additional processing. For this simple example, we will not be configuring index snapshots. For now, select the default, No.
Malcolm can be set up to forward its logs to a separate Malcolm instance, in which case we would select Yes here. Since this is a simple installation, we are going to go with the default. Select No.
Malcolm is resource heavy. At least 32 gigabytes of system memory, or RAM, is recommended to run Malcolm. The configuration script will detect how much memory the system has and make recommendations here for how much should be allocated to OpenSearch and Logstash. For this example, we'll accept the defaults. Select Yes.
Logstash is the Malcolm component used for parsing and enriching logs. This screen allows you to define how many pipelines logs should use to process logs in parallel. Select Yes to accept the default.
This question configures whether or not Malcolm should be automatically restarted when the system is rebooted. Select Yes to configure Malcolm to run each time the system boots. Select No if you would rather manually start Malcolm after each reboot.
The restart policy chosen here further defines the behavior we enabled on the previous screen. Choose On Failure if you want Malcolm to automatically restart when it encounters an error that causes it to stop. Choose Always if you want Malcolm to attempt to restart in all circumstances, regardless of the reason it stopped. Choosing Unless Stopped will behave like Always, the only exception being that if you manually stop Malcolm, it will remain stopped until you manually start it again. For this example, we will select Unless Stopped.
Encrypted HTTPS connections. This is an important selection because it requires users of Malcolm's dashboards and other user interfaces to use securely encrypted connections. You will want this in almost all cases. Select Yes.
Reverse proxy. This will be for a more complicated network setup where Malcolm will be running behind another proxy. Since that's beyond the scope of this example, select No.
External Docker network is another element for a more complicated Docker configuration. For this setup, leave it blank. Select OK.
Another video will go into more detail about the different methods Malcolm can use to authenticate users. You can also find that information in the Malcolm documentation. In this example, we are going to choose Basic, meaning that Malcolm will maintain its own list of usernames and passwords for users who are allowed to use Malcolm. Select OK.
Artifact storage. Malcolm stores several types of files representing network log data, PCAPs, log files, indexes for queries, and more. The directories where these artifacts are stored can be configured individually, but for this simple setup, Malcolm will store them all under the Malcolm installation directory. Select Yes.
Configuring index lifecycle policies for Arkime is beyond the scope of this example. Details about this feature can be found in the Malcolm documentation. Select No.
If this instance of Malcolm is intended to run long-term, it must be configured to periodically delete old data to make room for the new. If this Malcolm instance is intended for a short-term deployment, you might select No if you are not worried about it consuming all of the available storage. However, if its life cycle is intended to be more long-term, select Yes.
Since we selected Yes on the previous question, we are asked if we want to delete the oldest indices when the database exceeds a certain size. In order to ensure that the OpenSearch indices don't consume all available disk space, select Yes.
How large is that threshold? If you're unsure how much storage is available on the drive where Malcolm is installed, you may need to investigate to find that information. On Linux systems, the command to display the free disk space is df, which stands for disk free. For this example, installing Malcolm on virtual machine with a single drive, I can see that I have 255 gigabytes of free available space. We need to allocate some of that for the OpenSearch data store, some of it for PCAP files, and some of it for raw logs. For this example, let's say we are going to use 1/3 for each. This could be provided as either a numeric value with the storage units, such as 100 gigabytes, or as a percentage. We'll enter 30% for this example. Select OK.
Next, Malcolm will want us to define how we sort the indices to determine which one is oldest. The Malcolm documentation covers this in greater detail. For this example, select the default. Select No.
We have determined how much space our OpenSearch data store can use. Now, Malcolm is going to ask how much disk space may be used to store PCAP files. Select Yes. Arkime handles pruning the oldest PCAP files. This value is a bit backwards from the threshold we defined for OpenSearch earlier. It does not represent the amount of storage PCAP files are allowed to consume, but rather a free space threshold. When the unused space on this drive falls below this value, Arkime will delete PCAP files to free up space. This value could be specified in gigabytes or as a percentage. For example, entering 15% means delete old PCAP files when the drive has less than 15% free space. The Malcolm documentation provides further information. Select OK.
Everything up to this point in the configuration has dealt with how Malcolm can use the resources available to it. Now we will move into what features you would like Malcolm to have and what you can do with Malcolm. Malcolm can examine network traffic with several tools that serve as data sources, providing the network data that drives Malcolm's analysis dashboards. We are going to choose which of those analyzers to enable to examine the network data. While there is some overlap in the information about network traffic these tools generate, each provides its own unique benefits. The first data source is Arkime. We want Arkime to analyze network traffic, so select Yes.
Our second data source, Capa, is a signature-based detection system. Do you want it to analyze the network traffic? Select Yes.
Suricata's signatures come in the form of rule sets, which can be updated from the internet. Although Malcolm doesn't require internet to run, Suricata can be configured to periodically connect to the internet to download updates to its rule sets, similar to what an antivirus utility does. Your answer to this question will depend on whether this Malcolm instance will have internet connectivity or will be running offline. For this installation, we will say no. Don't go out to the internet.
Zeek, the third data source, provides traffic analysis across the widest range of network protocols. Here again, select Yes.
This question is specific to operational technology, OT, and industrial control systems, ICS, networks. Certain industries or government organizations may be interested in these protocols, while other organizations, for example, retail businesses or school districts, probably aren't. For this example, select No.
Malcolm enriches network data as it's processed, performing lookups and mappings to useful context. One such enrichment is a reverse DNS lookup for IP addresses. Reverse DNS lookups require a network connection. For this example, select No.
Mapping network hardware or MAC addresses to the vendor or manufacturer does not require network connectivity. Select the default Yes.
Select Yes to enable some calculations Malcolm can perform to rank strings by how much entropy or randomness they contain. This ends the enrichment portion of the configuration.
Malcolm can receive data from a network sensor device, such as Hedgehog Linux. Depending on the complexity of the network being monitored, placing distinct sensors at different capture points may be necessary to provide the desired visibility into the traffic. Alternately, Malcolm itself can act as an all-in-one solution to monitor a single capture point. If you have an external Hedgehog Linux sensor or plan on forwarding other third-party logs, choose Yes. Otherwise, choose No. For this example, we will select Yes.
Malcolm can detect when files are transferred across the network. For example, it may detect a file attached to an email and scan that file for malicious content. This question asks whether or not Malcolm should use Zeek to extract files from network traffic for further analysis. For this example, we want to enable the feature by selecting Yes.
What type of files should Malcolm extract and scan? Would you like all files, images, text files, or documents? Or would you like a smaller subset? The set of file types Malcolm chooses to examine can be configured to include all files, or only a select few. The right choice depends on a trade-off between the performance and storage required to extract and preserve files, and the desired level of visibility into file transfers. We'll describe two common selections here, but more detail can be found in the Malcolm documentation. Selecting Interesting will cause Malcolm to only extract and scan file types that are commonly used as attack vectors for malware, including executable files, zip files, PDFs, or spreadsheets containing macros. If you're unsure, this is a good choice. Selecting all files except common plain text files will extract almost all file types, only ignoring a small subset of text-only file types. For this example, we are going to choose Interesting. Select OK. What do you want Malcolm to do with the files it extracts and scans? Should they be stored for further manual examination by an analyst, or simply logged then discarded? Your choices here are to save no files, none, all files, or quarantined. Quarantined means that a copy of the file will only be preserved if Malcolm determined it might contain something suspicious. For this example, we will choose Quarantined. Select OK. Do we want Malcolm to provide a web interface for the user to be able to browse extracted files and download them? For this example, select Yes.
As files extracted and scanned by Malcolm may contain malware, it makes sense to wrap them in a zip archive when downloading them. For this example, select Yes.
Password-protecting zip files containing potential malware is a best practice to help avoid unintentionally exposing an analyst's system to malware. A common password used in the industry for this purpose is the word infected, but you are free to specify whatever password you wish. For this example, we'll use the password infected. Select OK. How will Malcolm determine if files detected in network traffic contain malicious content? Malcolm provides a few tools for this purpose. One of them is ClamAV, an open-source antivirus tool. Select Yes. Yara is a signature-based tool that can look for patterns in files that potentially indicate malware or ransomware. Malcolm comes with a default set of Yara rules, or you can include your own custom rules. See the documentation for more information. Select Yes. Capa is an executable capabilities analyzer. If someone is transferring executable files, applications, or programs across your network, Capa can provide more information about what those programs can do. Select Yes.
VirusTotal is an external service with a limited free and paid subscription-based offerings. If your Malcolm instance has internet connectivity, you may provide your VirusTotal API key to allow Malcolm to submit file hashes to VirusTotal and report the results. If your organization already has a subscription to VirusTotal, you may want to select Yes. For our example, select No.
Similar to how we configured Suricata rule updates earlier, Malcolm can download updates for the rules used by some of its file scanning tools. If your Malcolm instance is internet connected and you want it to periodically download these updates, select Yes. For this example, select No.
NetBox is Malcolm's asset inventory tool. The video titled NetBox Overview on the Malcolm YouTube channel provides a good introduction. To enable NetBox, select Yes. As Malcolm processes network data, it can add context to that data using the NetBox inventory. Select Yes. To end up with the most accurate network asset inventory, we recommend populating the devices in NetBox manually. However, you may select Yes here instead for Malcolm to automatically populate the NetBox inventory based on observed traffic, whether or not that observed traffic represents the intended network state. The Malcolm documentation contains more information on this topic. For this example, select No.
NetBox groups objects in its inventory by site. A site could represent a city, a building, an office, or any other physical or logical grouping. Here we will provide a default site name that Malcolm will apply to network traffic data. For this example, we will name our default site main office. Select OK.
IP addresses in the NetBox inventory are grouped together as subnets or network segments. NetBox calls these segments prefixes. Malcolm can automatically create those subnet groupings for you or require you to specify them manually. We'll select No to disable the auto-creation of IP prefixes.
Should Malcolm capture live network traffic? As we discussed earlier, Malcolm can receive network logs from network sensors deployed throughout your network, or it can monitor live traffic locally. For this example, we will say yes, as we want this Malcolm instance to monitor a local interface for traffic capture. Select OK.
For Malcolm to capture live traffic, we need to specify the capture interface or interfaces on which that traffic will be seen. If you're unsure of the names of the network interfaces on the host running Malcolm, there are a few ways you can look up that information. If this is a Malcolm instance created from the installation ISO, click on the network icon in the system tray, then select Connection Information. The name of the network interface is shown. In our example, its name is ENP1S0, but yours may be different. On other Linux platforms, open a terminal and run the command IPA. This will give you a list of your network interfaces. The likely candidates for the physical network interfaces are the ones that don't belong to the Docker network subsystem and aren't a loopback or bridge interface. Make note of the network interface name and enter it here. Select OK.
OpenSearch dashboards can use either a light or dark mode. Select Yes for dark mode and No for light mode according to your personal preference. For this instance, we will select Yes.
Malcolm's configuration is complete. Select OK to close the configuration window. The final step before we're ready to run Malcolm is to set up authentication. If you need to reconfigure authentication at a later time, you can open a terminal, navigate to the Malcolm installation directory by running cd malcolm, then run /scripts/auth_seb. Alternately, the first time you start Malcolm, the authentication setup wizard will automatically open if it has not yet been configured.
There are several parts to configuring authentication. Since this is the first time we're doing it for this Malcolm instance, we will select All. Select OK. Do you want to store a username and password for the primary Malcolm user account? Select Yes.
Next, provide the username to use for the account. For this example, we will use Administrator. Select OK.
You will be prompted to provide a password for the username you specified in the previous dialog. For security, we recommend using a strong password. You will need to enter the password twice to confirm it. Select OK.
Apart from this primary administrator account, other local accounts can be created later by clicking the user management icon in the toolbar. Select OK.
Malcolm needs to create a self-signed certificate for HTTPS access. This will take about 10 to 30 seconds to generate. Select Yes.
A remote network sensor such as Hedgehog Linux will also need to provide valid certificates to forward log data to this Malcolm instance. Even if you are not planning on using a network sensor at this time, select Yes to generate this certificate in case it's needed later.
Using a remote OpenSearch or Elasticsearch data store will be covered in another video. For this example, select No. This is another question that will be discussed in another video on how to use email alerts with Malcolm. For today's example, select No. NetBox needs to have some internal passwords randomly generated to protect its internal database. These passwords are not used directly by Malcolm end users. Select Yes to ensure they are generated.
Similar to the previous question, Arkime's viewer uses an internal secret hash. Select the default option to continue.
We'll cover this question in another video as part of configuring Hedgehog Linux. You can also read the documentation for more information. For this simple Malcolm setup, select No.
If you already clicked the icon to start Malcolm from the toolbar, you'll see Malcolm starting up and initializing. If not, click the Start Malcolm icon from the toolbar or run /scripts/start as described in the Running Malcolm video.
In this video, we step through all of the questions to configure Malcolm and set up its authentication. Check out the description section for links to the Malcolm GitHub site, a Malcolm discussion forum, and more.